As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the Black Spire base camp, we gathered around the flickering campfire, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of pine. Led by the seasoned mountaineer, Dr. Eleanor Frost, we were determined to be the first to chart the uncharted peaks of the Black Spire mountain range. None of us were aware of the ancient curse that awaited us in the icy heights above. The firelight danced on our faces as we discussed the route, unaware of the true challenges that lay ahead. The following morning, we rose with the dawn, the crisp mountain air invigorating our spirits. Dr. Frost, a woman of unwavering determination, briefed us on the day's journey. We packed our gear, triple-checked our equipment, and set off into the dense forest that bordered the base camp. The trail was steep and unforgiving, but the allure of the unknown spurred us on. The Black Spire Range, with its snow-capped peaks and jagged ridges, loomed ominously in the distance. As we trekked higher, the landscape began to change. The lush greenery of the forest gave way to rocky terrain and sparse vegetation. The air grew thinner and colder, each breath a reminder of the altitude we were gaining. Dr. Frost led us with a confidence that was both reassuring and inspiring. The rest of the team, seasoned climbers and explorers in their own right, followed her lead without question. Little did we know, the true test of our resolve was yet to come. By midday, we reached a narrow pass that cut through the mountain like a scar. The wind howled through the gap, carrying with it an eerie whisper that sent shivers down my spine. We paused for a brief rest, huddled together for warmth. The mountains seemed to be watching us, their silent sentinels casting long shadows over our path. It was then that we noticed the first signs of something amiss. Strange symbols carved into the rocks, their meaning lost to time. Dr. Frost examined the symbols with a furrowed brow, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a flicker of unease. "Ancient markings," she muttered, tracing the lines with her gloved fingers. "A warning, perhaps." The rest of us exchanged uneasy glances, but pressed on, our curiosity outweighing our growing apprehension. The trail grew steeper, each step a battle against gravity and the biting cold. As night fell, we set up camp in a sheltered alcove, the jagged cliffs providing some respite from the relentless wind. We huddled around the fire, the flames casting long, dancing shadows on the rock walls. The mood was somber, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. Dr. Frost shared stories of past expeditions, her voice a steady anchor in the encroaching darkness. But even her tales of triumph and survival couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Sleep came fitfully that night, the howling wind and strange noises from the darkness beyond our camp keeping us on edge. I woke several times, each time convinced that I heard footsteps crunching in the snow just beyond the firelight. The others seemed equally restless, their faces pale and drawn in the morning light. We broke camp silently, the usual camaraderie replaced by a tense silence. As we continued our ascent, the terrain grew more treacherous. Loose rocks and hidden crevices turned each step into a potential hazard. The air grew thinner, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Despite the physical challenges, it was the sense of being watched that unnerved me the most. I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, but every time I turned, there was nothing there. It was as if the mountains themselves were alive, shifting and watching our every move. Around midday, we came across an ancient, crumbling structure partially buried in the snow. Dr. Frost identified it as a long-forgotten outpost from a civilization that once inhabited these peaks. The walls were covered in more of those strange symbols, and as we explored, we found relics of a bygone era, tools, pottery, and the remnants of what appeared to be ceremonial objects. The air inside was thick with a sense of history, and something else, something darker. We pressed on, the discovery of the outpost adding a new layer of urgency to our mission. Dr. Frost was determined to uncover the secrets of the Black Spire Range, but I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. The higher we climbed, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air was charged with an almost tangible tension, as if the mountains themselves were warning us to turn back. Our progress was slow, each step a struggle against the thinning air and the weight of our packs. The path narrowed, and we were forced to navigate a series of treacherous ice fields. One misstep could send us plummeting into the abyss below. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of our boots on the snow and the occasional crack of ice. We moved cautiously, aware that one mistake could be fatal. As we approached the summit, the weather took a turn for the worse. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and a biting wind whipped through the mountains, carrying with it a flurry of snow. Visibility dropped to near zero, and we were forced to take shelter in a small cave. The entrance was barely wide enough for us to squeeze through, but inside, it was mercifully sheltered from the storm. Huddled together in the cave, we tried to keep warm and dry. The walls were covered in more of those strange symbols, their meanings still a mystery. Dr. Frost studied them intently, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of our headlamps. "These are unlike anything I've seen before," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of excitement and dread. "It's as if they were meant to ward off something, or someone." The storm raged outside, trapping us in the cave for what felt like hours. The wind howled like a living thing, and the temperature plummeted. We took turns keeping watch, our nerves frayed by the relentless assault of the elements. As the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of the cave, and strange sounds echoed through the darkness. When the storm finally subsided, we emerged from the cave, our spirits dampened, but our resolve unbroken. The world outside was transformed into a winter wonderland, the snow blanketing everything in a pristine layer of white. The beauty of the scene was marred by an undercurrent of unease, as if the mountains were mocking our determination. We pressed on, driven by a mixture of curiosity and fear. As we neared the summit, the landscape became increasingly surreal. The snow-covered peaks and valleys were dotted with strange, unnatural formations. Pillars of ice that seemed to defy the laws of physics, and rock formations that looked almost man-made. The sense of foreboding grew stronger with each step, and I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something, or someone, following us. The summit was within sight, when we stumbled upon a massive stone altar half buried in the snow. The carvings on its surface were ancient and intricate, depicting scenes of ritual and sacrifice. Dr. Frost examined the altar with a mixture of awe and horror. "This must be what they were trying to keep hidden," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A place of power and danger." The air around the altar was charged with an almost palpable energy, and we could feel it vibrating through our bones. Dr. Frost warned us not to touch anything, but curiosity got the better of one of our team members, a young climber named Jake. He reached out to brush the snow off one of the carvings, and as soon as his hand made contact, a shock wave of energy rippled through the air, knocking us all off our feet. Jake screamed and fell to the ground, convulsing as if he had been struck by lightning. We rushed to his side, but there was little we could do. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he mumbled incoherently. The symbols on the altar seemed to glow with an eerie light, and the air was filled with a low, ominous hum. Dr. Frost frantically tried to revive him, but it was clear that whatever he had touched had unleashed something beyond our understanding. We were forced to leave Jake behind, his body too heavy and our situation too dire to carry him. The loss weighed heavily on us, and the mood turned somber as we continued our ascent. Dr. Frost's determination was now tempered with a sense of caution, and we moved slowly and deliberately, aware that the mountain was not just a physical challenge, but a spiritual one as well. As we neared the summit, we came across the ruins of an ancient city, its stone buildings half buried in the snow. The architecture was unlike anything we had ever seen, a blend of styles and influences from civilizations long forgotten. The city was a ghost town, its streets silent and empty, but the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. We explored cautiously, aware that we were intruding on sacred ground. The city's central plaza was dominated by a massive stone statue, its features worn and weathered by time. The figure depicted was a fearsome warrior, clad in armor and holding a sword aloft. The base of the statue was inscribed with more of those strange symbols, their meaning still a mystery. Dr. Frost studied the inscription intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This place was once a great civilization," she said, "but something brought it to its knees." As we explored the city, we uncovered more evidence of the rituals and ceremonies that had once taken place here. The buildings were filled with altars, offerings, and strange artifacts that seemed to defy explanation. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else. Something rotten. We moved cautiously, aware that we were disturbing something ancient and powerful. The deeper we ventured into the city, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The shadows seemed to lengthen and deepen, and the air grew colder. We could feel the presence of something malevolent, lurking just out of sight. Dr. Frost urged us to stick together, but the labyrinthine streets and alleyways made it difficult to stay on course. We were lost in a maze of stone and snow, and the sense of being watched was now an overwhelming terror. It was in one of the city's grand temples that we found the first sign of what had happened to its inhabitants. The walls were covered in frescoes, depicting scenes of ritual and sacrifice. The figures twisted and contorted in agony. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the floor was littered with the bones of those who had perished here. Dr. Frost's face was pale as she took in the scene, her usual confidence shaken to its core. As we stood in the temple, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The walls shook, and the air was filled with the sound of stone grinding against stone. We rushed outside, just in time to see the ground split open, revealing a massive chasm that ran through the heart of the city. The mountains were shifting, the very earth beneath our feet betraying us. We had awakened something ancient and powerful, and it was determined to make us pay for our trespass. The chasm cut off our route back to the base camp, trapping us in the city. The only way forward was up, towards the summit. Dr. Frost led the way, her face set in grim determination. We moved quickly, the urgency of our situation spurring us on. The air grew colder and thinner as we climbed, the wind howling through the ruins like a banshee's wail. The summit was within reach, but the journey had taken its toll. As we reached the final ridge, the sky darkened, and the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. The summit was crowned with a massive stone altar, similar to the one we had encountered earlier, but larger and more ornate. The carvings were more intricate, depicting scenes of ritual and sacrifice on a grand scale. The air around the altar was charged with energy, and we could feel it pulsing through the ground beneath our feet. Dr. Frost approached the altar cautiously, her eyes scanning the carvings for any clue as to what had happened here. The rest of us hung back, our nerves frayed by the events of the past few days. The sky above us was a swirling mass of dark clouds, and the wind howled through the mountains with a ferocity that shook the very ground. It was then that we heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the very heart of the mountain. The growl grew louder, reverberating through the air and shaking the ground beneath our feet. The altar began to glow with an eerie light, and the carvings seemed to come to life, their figures twisting and writhing in agony. Dr. Frost shouted something, but her words were lost in the cacophony of sound. The ground beneath us began to crack and shift, and we were thrown to the ground as the mountain itself seemed to come alive. We scrambled to our feet, desperately trying to find a way out. The ground was splitting apart, massive chasms opening up around us. The air was filled with the sound of stone grinding against stone, and the growl had become a deafening roar. The mountain was collapsing, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Dr. Frost urged us to run, but there was nowhere to go. The mountain had us trapped. In a moment of sheer desperation, I grabbed a piece of the broken altar and hurled it into one of the chasms. The ground shook violently, and for a brief moment, the roaring ceased. The air was thick with dust and debris, and we could barely see each other through the haze. Dr. Frost was the first to recover, her eyes wide with fear and determination. "We need to get off this mountain," she said, her voice hoarse. "Now!" We stumbled down the mountain, the path treacherous and uncertain. The ground was still shifting beneath our feet, and the wind howled with a ferocity that threatened to knock us off balance. We moved as quickly as we could, our only goal to get as far away from the summit as possible. The sky above us was a swirling mass of dark clouds, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone, and something else, something rotten. As we descended, the terrain became more treacherous. The snow was deep and unstable, and the ground beneath it was a maze of hidden crevices and pitfalls. We moved cautiously, aware that one misstep could be our last. The wind was relentless, whipping through the mountains with a force that threatened to tear us apart. But we pressed on, driven by a primal instinct to survive. The further we descended, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The mountains seemed to close in around us, their jagged peaks casting long shadows over our path. The sense of being watched was now an overwhelming terror, and I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something, or someone, following us. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground was littered with the bones of those who had come before us. As we neared the base of the mountain, the landscape began to change. The snow gave way to rocky terrain and sparse vegetation, and the air grew warmer. But the sense of unease remained, a constant reminder of the horrors we had witnessed. Dr. Frost was silent, her usual confidence replaced by a grim determination to get us off the mountain alive. The rest of the team was equally subdued, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. The Black Spire base camp came into view just as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. The sight of the camp should have been a relief, but instead it filled me with a deep sense of dread. The camp was eerily silent, the tents standing like ghostly sentinels in the early morning light. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of what we had experienced pressing down on me like a physical force. As we staggered into the camp, the remaining members of the expedition emerged from their tents, their faces etched with concern. They had seen the storm raging over the mountains and feared the worst. Dr. Frost briefed them on what had happened, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. The weight of our losses hung heavily in the air, and the mood was somber as we began to pack up our gear. With dawn breaking over the desolate summit, casting an eerie glow on the ruins of the lost city, we began our descent from the Black Spire Range. The few remaining members of the expedition were silent, their faces etched with terror and sorrow. The malevolent spirits of Black Spire had claimed their toll. But we carried with us the chilling tale of an ancient evil, and the haunting reminder that some peaks are best left unconquered. As we left the mountains behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief mixed with a lingering unease. The Black Spire Range had taken more from us than we had bargained for, and the memories of what we had seen and experienced would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The expedition had been a success in the most technical sense, but the cost had been far too high. Some mysteries, I realized, are better left unsolved, and some places are better left unexplored.